Is there a minimum or a maximum PSI that you can use with the garden grid when you're watering your garden? Yes and no. Let's start with maximum. When designing the garden grid, we knew from experience that traditional watering systems like drip lines and soaker hoses needed a pressure reducer in order to drop the PSI that you were supplying them down to around 25 PSI. The irony of this is that most homes have a PSI of about 35 to 70 PSI. So essentially you needed to use this reducer in order to irrigate your garden. We thought that was silly. So when we designed the garden grid, we made it work with a wide range of pressures. Pressure reducers also made less water available to distribute to your garden simultaneously. It basically reduced the PSI and of course the volume of water that could then spread out to everything. But if you were using a drip line, you basically had to use them or else your drip line could burst. That's why when we designed the garden grid, we designed them to not need pressure reducers. So in terms of max PSI, there really isn't one for the garden grid when you're using it with your typical household or even light commercial uses. If your garden grid is getting too much water, it's just going to spray its water streams really far. All you need to do to adjust for that is simply turn down your hose spigot handle, or if you're using our valves or the valves that come with our garden grid manifolds, adjust there until your water streams are just right. For minimum PSI, there is a minimum. Like I mentioned earlier, most homes have a PSI range from 35 to 70. A minimum really comes into play when you're using something like a rain barrel or any kind of gravity-fed water supply. Those types of water supply, if they don't have a pump to generate pressure, rely on elevation in order to create pressure for the water going to your garden. Specifically, every 2.31 feet, very specific number, every 2.31 feet of elevation difference between the top of your water and the point of exit, aka your garden, will generate a whopping 1 PSI. That's why water towers are so tall. They use that elevation to create pressure for the water distribution. So unless the top of your gravity-fed water supply is really high up in comparison to where your gardens are, you're gonna wanna use a sump pump. A 1/3 horsepower sump pump provides plenty of pressure and volume to be able to water multiple gardens. Without a pump on a gravity-fed system, and if you're not using standard household water pressure, you're gonna wanna have a minimum of 10 PSI in order to supply your garden grid. With just the minimum of 10 PSI going to a standard sized garden hose, you'll be able to comfortably run a single garden grid from drip irrigation all the way up to full stream watering.